Nothing goes as expected when James finds $27,000 of money stolen from a grocery store. Good times, good times. Battle of the Network shows. Join Rick Brooks and Mike Kogel as they explore the TV of the 70s and 80s through hand-picked episodes of their favorite and not-so-favorite series.
Welcome to another Battle of the Network shows. I'm Mike, and I'm here with Rick.
Hey, everybody.
And we just want to remind you, you can get in touch with us at mailbag@battleofthenetworkshows.com or come to our Facebook page. And we're also on Instagram and Twitter. Well, the Twitter is @BatNetShows because Battle of the Network Shows is too long for Twitter.
Yes, that's BATTNET shows.com.
Correct. What are we talking about today?
We're talking about one of my favorite shows growing up and a show that I think still holds up pretty well, and that show is Good Times. Oh. Part of the massive Norman Lear family of shows.
Yeah. I would say we've done a couple Norman Lear connected shows, but this is our first real deal Norman Lear show.
I would say that's a good observation. Yes, Norman Lear, from what I've read, he was the one that actually suggested this show be formed.
Uh-huh.
So even though in some ways it's not a pure spin-off of All in the Family and then Maude.
Right.
In some ways it's a spin-off of a spin-off, but in other ways, which we can get into, the character changed so much that I think you could argue if it's a true spin-off, but it does feel much like some of those other sitcoms, and I think it's been compared, and at the time it was compared to All in the Family. The shorthand way would be, well, it's a black All in the Family.
Right. But it definitely has that mix of comedy and social drama.
Exactly.
Or personal drama. Not always social drama, but...
Yes, but definitely a thread of social relevance running throughout the entire series.
Yeah. I just learned yesterday that one of the co-creators played Lionel on All in the Family and portions of The Jeffersons.
Yes.
The original Lionel.
Yes, he was the original Lionel.
Yeah, Mike Evans.
And he left in a salary dispute.
Uh-huh.
But was also involved with creating this show.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, Norman Lear asked him, Mike Evans,
right,
the actor, to create a show, an urban show, that they could develop as a sitcom.
That's pretty progressive of Norman there.
Yeah.
Even though there then later were issues with the actual production of the show, but yeah, that was good to see, and I don't remember the co-creator's name.
Eric Monti, maybe?
Yeah, and I guess he was also black.
Yeah, I think he was the one that did a lot of the heavy lifting as far as developing the concept.
Mm-hmm.
With Mike Evans, they both kind of shared the co-creator credit, and I think Eric Monti is the one now who's sort of been active in trying to revive the show in some form for as long as I can remember. I think there's noise of him trying to remake it or
that sounds
bring
like a good
about a
idea.
reunion, something like that. So yeah.
Yeah, and one of the characters is named Michael Evans.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, this is what I'm curious about. I don't know if there's an answer. But so when Florida, Esther Roll's character was on Maude, did she have the last name Evans?
I believe so, and she had a husband, but
his name
was not
different.
seen, but the husband's name was different.
Yeah. So it's, I guess they just, because on the one hand you could look at that and like, oh, okay, they named this character after one of the writers. Maybe it's based on his family.
Right.
And yet the Evans name was already established.
The Evans name was established. I don't know if the names of the kids were established. Right. And I think the occupation of the father was different. I mean, they really kind of...
And they lived in a different state.
Yeah, I think they kind of took Esther Roll and, okay, we'll build a show around her, and it's sort of a spin-off, but in many ways it's not really the same character, I would say.
Right. Because I did read that they sort of combined two ideas. The idea of giving her a show and this sort of... The idea of what became Good Times was already in development.
Yeah.
And sort of that it was more efficient to do.
So eventually, I think they're going to need a Crisis on Norman Lear Earths to reconcile this continuity.
Right.
Because technically, I think there's several Floridas running around
Several.
in the tangled television continuity.
Whoa. Was there an All in the Family version too?
Well, there's the
Maude was
the Maud Florida and the Good Times Florida.
Okay, yeah. I thought maybe there was a third.
Oh, well, maybe there is.
Yeah.
I don't know offhand. Maybe
Right.
If she appeared on Love American Style or something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe there's another one in a different continuity.
Right, and there's the whole continuity, well, it'd be the same continuity, but nobody saw of her living in Arizona with Moses Gunn.
Right. Well, the adventures she had out there,
Yeah.
arguably, could be a separate continuity.
Right.
And then, of course, there's the World War II Florida, who was basically the same, with just older and had streaks of gray in her hair earlier than the later Florida did. So.
Right, yeah, and the steampunk Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the evil Florida
Oh,
that did bad things instead of
Right.
doing good things for the community and for her family. So
yeah.
eventually they'll figure this out.
And really, the Norman Lear, that universe does need a lot of, there were 2 George Jeffersons.
Mm-hmm.
There, 2 Lionels.
Yeah, yeah. It's really a tangled
confusing
mess.
one. Yeah.
I mean, growing up, I could understand all this because I just accepted it as TV, but I could understand why eventually they would want to clean up the continuity and start over. So maybe someday they'll do that.
Yeah. And is the current One Day at a Time in the same universe as the previous One Day at a Time?
That's something that would have to be resolved in this this crisis,
Yeah.
I believe. I do not know the answer to that.
Oh, God. And what would that do to the Tommy Westphall universe?
Ugh. That would be shattering.
Yeah. Plus, there are at least 2 people who look like Charlotte Rae in the. Probably more.
Yes.
There are probably 3 or 4, 5 of those running around.
Yeah. We could have a crisis on it with Charlotte Rae.
Yeah.
That would be a happening in its own right. But
Right.
well, eventually, maybe someone will come along, and Norman Lear, if you're listening, we'd love to see that project
Yeah.
to finally straighten out these things that fans have been arguing about for years.
Mm-hmm.
But today we're focusing more on one particular episode in, I'd say, the Good Times Prime universe, maybe, or the Good Times 1. And that episode is called The Windfall. It's from the 2nd season, episode 12. And it originally aired December 3rd, 1974 at 8 p.m. on CBS. And you know what it went up against? It went up against 2 shows, M12 on NBC and Happy Days
Whoa.
on ABC.
Wow. And that's from what I saw. Was it this season or the 3rd season that was like the Good Times was in the top 10?
I think it was this season.
Man.
Good Times did very well and was beating Happy Days for a while, and then I think the next season was when Happy Days started to become bigger, and Happy Days surpassed Good Times. So this is something, again, we can get into, but one thing that Jimmy Walker, who plays JJ, one thing that he mentioned in sort of defending the show's ratings was that, well, it was a popular show. It did get moved around several times. Cast members changed. The show may have changed a little bit in direction, but one of the big factors that people don't really mention was that it was going up against Happy Days, which was becoming just a phenomenal hit at the time. So,
Right.
But for now, yeah, it was holding its own, if not surpassing Happy Days, and Adam 12 on NBC was kind of bringing up the rear in that race.
Yeah, I didn't realize, one, how successful it was early on, but also then the decline in ratings is, by the end, is pretty staggering.
Yeah, it really dropped off quickly and kind of stuck around a little bit after it dropped off, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's definitely a dichotomy if you look at it. Start out, I think, a kind of a short season 1, then got a full season, and was maybe its peak in about the time we're talking here, season 2. And season 3, it was still pretty strong, and then after that, things kind of changed, and the show declined. And me personally, I also see it as 2 distinct eras of the show. You've got the John Amos years, and then the non-John Amos years. And even though Florida was around for several of those seasons and some of those episodes, to me, it wasn't the same show without the father, and I didn't like it as much.
Based on what I've seen, yeah, I agree. I remember this being on in reruns all the time.
Yes, exactly.
And
that's how
watching
I
it,
watched it.
and yet I didn't have, a strong memory of any particular episode or any thing. Just that it was on, and that I know I watched it, and I remember being older and seeing it again, and like I'm sure I had seen plenty of episodes with John Amos, but yet seeing an episode and knowing who he was from something else,
Yeah.
and like what, there was a father on what,
Right.
and it was John Amos or that guy, or, however, because he's of course a very recognizable guy, and it's kind of like based on the quality of this episode and another one I watched from this season and that you recommended, and having seen bits and pieces of some of those later ones and reading about it and just like some of the ideas of them, yeah, I'm going to agree with you. That
Yeah.
these the first 3 seasons have got to be the prime, not comic book prime, but
Yeah.
prime in quality. Even though they were already, or at least depending on whose point of view you're looking at, they were fighting the urge to just make it the JJ show.
Yeah. And they brought in other characters like Thelma's husband, Keith, and Johnny Brown as Bookman, the super, became more of a regular and more of a presence, and kind of became more of like an insult-based show. Whereas it really started out more as a family show, and then became an extended family show with a little bit less serious, although still covering serious themes, but it just changed a little bit, and I just like John Amos, so
Yeah.
I watched it a lot too as a kid, and that's how I first learned about this show, was through reruns. And I think I might have brought up in the podcast before, but I was sort of fascinated by ghetto life, for lack of a better term, when I was growing up. There were the novels of a guy named Frank Bonham, who wrote like a lot of children's books about kids growing up in unfortunate circumstances, usually minorities. And it was all over television, and especially rerun television, because I wasn't watching a lot of these 1970 shows when they were on, but growing up, yeah, you had your Good Times. Different Strokes was a little bit different, but they were kids from that background.
Yeah.
What's Happening, kind of the thing. And of those shows, even Sanford and Son. Sanford and Son was not a glamour show by any means, but Good Times was the show that really kind of captured, at least an attempt, to depict life in what was called the ghetto. And the characters use that phrase all the time. They refer to themselves as being in the ghetto. The song, refers to their circumstances, and it's based on a real life projects in Chicago, the Cabrini Green complex. They don't call it that on the show, but they are living in Chicago, and they are living in the projects.
Yeah.
So to me, it was very interesting because of the setting. Because even though there were a lot of what you might call black sitcoms in reruns, this was unique in the focus on explicitly lower class characters and situations. And I also thought it was really funny.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it wasn't even about Jimmy Walker, even though he kind of stole the show, some thought. But I liked the parents.
Yeah.
And the whole cast.
Yeah, I think when you're really young and seeing this, the Jimmy Walker would probably stand out because he's goofy, and of course that audience is howling with laughter when that dynamite goes off.
Yeah.
But there's something weird about it that, especially him, I feel like a lot of times he's just sort of standing in the corner of the set, like especially once he was painting a lot and. And he's just standing over there, and then he'll walk over and make a joke, or he's just there waiting for his moment. And all like a lot of the characters, there'll be moments where 2 characters are talking, and everyone else is just sort of standing close by because it's a small set, given that it's the projects and it's this small apartment, and that's understandable. And this episode, everything they don't leave the set at all. So there's an element of that feels strange to me, but I think this is a sitcom thing.
Well, I think it also fit the that parallel, the real life situation, which remind me, we'll get into that later. But Jimmy Walker himself felt other than the cast,
right?
So it's interesting that he looks that way, especially in certain episodes. Originally, the show was going to be more built around Michael because he's the militant one, the self-described militant one, and he's the socially conscious one of the family, and the idea was that he would say a lot of the political things that they thought would be threatening coming from John Amos.
Yeah.
So you could have a kid say these things and sort of introduce these ideas, and then you would essentially build a lot of the storylines around him. Well, as we've seen, that quickly changed, and he never really was what I would call the focus of the show, but I think he was supposed to be like the focus of the kids part of the show, at least at first, and he was pretty much surpassed by Jimmy Walker's character.
Yeah. The Michael character has ambitions to be a lawyer and a Supreme Court justice, and is already does well in school and all of this. And we both read this article from the time where Esther Roll in particular was expressing a lot of frustration with the JJ character, him being a sort of stereotype and a clown, and that she claimed at least Michael's role had been reduced a lot. Mm-hmm. I think the producers claimed otherwise, but it sounds like what you're saying.
Well,
but that's true. And you only have 25 minutes or whatever to fill, but
yeah. And Thelma, the middle child, I guess, the sister, she had aspirations of, kind of in the performing arts, but she's clearly an intelligent person, and hardly a caricature too.
Right, and yet my memory of her is basically her and JJ trading barbs.
Yeah, that was a big part of the show, definitely.
Yeah.
I think this particular episode, I like it because it covers a lot of the themes that I like about the show, and so I think we should maybe get into it and talk about the show, because it epitomizes the series pretty well from my point of view. But also, let me just say real quickly that Good Times has been on pretty much in reruns for years. I think it's a shame, though, that now, a lot of times, one of the reasons it's been on is because you've got these cable networks aimed at a predominantly African-American audience, so like TV One, things like that. They've kind of ensured that Good Times has always been on the air. I think over the years also Antenna, some of these digital sub-channels like Antenna and Get TV, they've kept it alive as well. But I think as long as there's some of the more specialty channels and that they're willing to show things that are older, more so than other cable networks, it seems like, I think Good Times is always going to be sticking around. I can't think of a time where it hasn't been on somewhere since it aired.
I would hope that it would be on not just like TV One, because certainly at the time it aired, and the idea of it was to serve a couple audiences. One is to serve the black audience and allow them to see themselves, and which is the part of the big conversation today about diversity and stuff, that people want to see themselves reflected. And then the other part is that for people who are not like them, to see them and maybe learn something, some empathy, or see the humanity in people who are different from them, and maybe even sometimes they don't like,
right, or
think they don't like. And I think probably the issues people had with JJ connect to that are people enjoying JJ, enjoying the show for the right reason, or are they just having some of their biases confirmed by that character?
I mean, I think that's what the adults in the show would have said. Like Esther Roll and John Amos might have argued that it was becoming that way. I never saw it like that, and I also think that it deserves, pardon the expression, not to be ghettoized to channels like TV One. It could be on TV Land or something if TV Land was still kind of in that business, but it's good enough and reaches a broad enough audience that it really doesn't deserve to be pigeonholed as that kind of show. And also, to my eyes, race is treated more as a comic situation on the show. To me, the real serious underlying thing is class. Mm-hmm. And I think today, when we talk about lower class sitcoms, you don't necessarily get a lot of the living paycheck to paycheck and kind of focus on actually getting unemployment and things like that you do in a show like Good Times. So that alone makes it a unique voice, and I would argue that makes it even more unique than the African American experience aspect of it.
Right. But let's get into the episode.
The essential premise happens, or the action that starts the whole plot happens off camera. So we see James talking about it. He's found money that was stolen and he's returned it to this grocery store. I can't remember the name of the grocery.
Borgen's supermarket chain.
Borgen's supermarket chain, yeah.
Which was hard to... I thought it was Morgan's, and then I thought it was Bargains, but the Mr. Borgen is in the credits. Ah, okay. Yeah, so the family is gathered around to watch James on the news. Yeah. And he's going to be interviewed about his good deed, what he's done, returning the money. Right.
So they're all excited about it. And I guess the thing is, so they watch the interview, and James comes home, and they're kind of surprised, but it was a pre-taped interview. Yeah. So he's on, I guess it's the 6 o'clock news, right? The main news story. He's on TV and he's a little nervous, but he's still James.
Right.
I mean, is there anything you want to say about the TV interview? Or?
I thought it was amusing, and I liked his nervousness, and he's also expecting, and they're all kind of expecting that he's going to get a big reward for doing this.
Yes, and people are telling him, I think they mentioned in the actual interview, make reference to it, and there's an assumption that, yes, he's going to get a reward. It's not for its own sake.
And this Mr. Borgen is there, kind of droning on about how special this is, and so first they give him a plaque, and he sheepishly takes that, and then he gets the actual reward, which is not what he's hoping for, but probably still a useful reward to the family, which is $50 gift certificate.
Yeah, I don't think we mentioned it was $27,000. I should have said that he found.
Yeah.
So he found $27,000 of stolen money.
Right. So
or he returned $27,000.
Yes, he returned. So obviously $27,000 would go a lot further than a $50 gift certificate. As anyone who's returned an item somewhere and just gotten a gift certificate, that's a little disappointing sometimes. Sometimes you need the cash.
It is, especially if you shop at some of the higher end grocery stores we have around here. $27,000 would help a lot more than a $50 gift card, because that might.
Here's a few months ago I bought some new windshield wipers.
Yes.
And I bought the ones that said so and so, you buy these you get this rebate. Mm-hmm. And the rebate came in a form of a gift card to the auto parts store.
Really?
Like, I go to an auto parts store every 2 years.
To get windshield wipers.
Right.
To get wiper blades.
And I might go get air filters, except for now that I know I can get them at Walmart for half the price. So it's frustrating.
Yeah. You were kind of expecting a $27,000 rebate, weren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can see how you'd be disappointed, definitely.
Check for $27,000.
Yeah.
Not 27. I mean, I guess you could almost, with a $27,000 gift card, like assemble a car, all the pieces for a car.
Yeah, you probably could. That's right.
I assume so. You can buy a car for that much. So.
Yeah.
You might not have a body or a chassis, though. You get the rest. But anyway, he's, not surprisingly, they're a little disappointed in that.
They are, and they had built it up. Mm-hmm. He had built it up in his own mind, clearly. One thing I do want to mention, too, is there's a story about this in the newspaper that they're reading, and the paper they're reading is the Chicago Defender, which was a African-American newspaper that's, I think, still around, but was around back then. It's just a nice little touch that when she was holding up, I was curious what paper, just because I try to notice those things. And it wasn't the Chicago Tribune. Right. It wasn't the Chicago Sun-Times.
It wasn't the Chicago made-up name.
No. Yeah. It was the Chicago Defender, a real newspaper.
That's pretty cool. Their neighbor and friend Willona really built them up too.
Oh, well, she builds pretty much everything. Yeah. Willona, the scene-stealing neighbor of the series. Uh-huh. And very sassy. Uh-huh. Force of nature. Yep. All these things. Are you a big Willona fan, Mike?
I don't know Willona enough to... I liked seeing her in these 2 episodes. I thought she was good. I think the other episode I watched, there was a set piece that I didn't care for so much, that it just strained the reality of things, where she sort of went into this gospel sermon kind of thing. Yeah. Just like, okay, here's the bit where Willona gets to be funny. Yeah. But in other, I like that she and Florida are friends, and seemed just what I saw of that friendship I liked, and and that they have this other person in their lives and who can come in and be part of it, but also be from the outside. Yeah, it's a solid. Good. She's a solid friend of the family, a solid female friend for Florida. But I think because of the way she performs, to me as a kid, JJ had the catchphrase "the Dynamite." But I always thought the most cartoonish thing about the show was Willona. Uh-huh. JJ was maybe the most non-polished performance. He was a stand-up coming from the world of stand-up. He wasn't an actor. Yeah. But Willona, she's got kind of like what I talked about, I think, with Mindy Cohn and the Facts of Life. She does little business. Every time she says a line, she doesn't just say a line. Yeah. She says a line and she moves her head and snaps her fingers and kind of does the whole bit, and kind of being reacts very sassy right now. Yeah. She kind of reacts to her own lines and starts tilting her head back and laughing and kind of expecting everybody to laugh along with her, just in a friendly way. Mm-hmm. And I think she's doing exactly what she's supposed to be doing, but it really stands out. Yeah. So to me, a lot of Willona, or Little Willona, goes a long way, and that's one of the reasons when later shows built around her and kind of brought on Janet Jackson as Penny as her sort of adopted daughter. I didn't like the show as much because I didn't really like the emphasis on Willona as much. Although they did tone down some of those aspects and make Willona a more serious character accordingly. Mm-hmm. But
in this kind of business, I always thought growing up, it's like, well, Wallona's the one that's kind of acting more clownish than JJ, but hey, that was just me.
Yeah. And Jeanette Dubois, she wrote the Jeffersons theme song, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
She did indeed. She's very talented. I don't have anything against her, but she just wasn't my favorite character. I liked the emphasis more on the immediate family. They get the $50, and James is particularly upset. He thinks it's a paltry reward for what he did.
Mm-hmm.
And he thinks it's kind of like a sign of, and not so much anger at the grocer, at the supermarket itself, as the system. He kind of sees this as a validation of the frustration he feels about, the whole world is stacked against them, people like them, and that circumstances are against him, and he tries to do the right thing, and then look what happens. He doesn't get his just desserts. That's kind of what his premise is.
Right.
And Florida is trying to talk him out of this and kind of taking a more, gentle kind of, okay, well, you still did the right thing, and not getting as upset about it as everybody else is.
Yeah, and it turns out he was already expecting this, and
he says this, it makes me even more glad that I did what I did.
Right, and then he takes wads of cash out of his pockets and throws them on the kitchen table.
Yeah,
and it turns out he kept $2,000.
Right, he kept $2,000 and returned the rest. That's a pretty good ratio.
Yeah,
but not quite the altruistic move that we thought he'd made.
Right,
and that others thought he made.
Yeah.
Because while this is going on, they're getting some feedback from some other people, which is a little bizarre, right?
Yeah. Yeah, getting various, do you call them, not exactly prank calls. I guess they're just phone calls where people are swearing at them for returning the money.
Yeah, I mean, they're treated kind of like obscene phone calls.
Yeah.
Which, there's something that we don't really deal with today in the world of caller ID and
right.
screening your calls, and just people not doing that as much anymore, I guess.
Not having phone books.
Yeah, right. Having other outlets.
Yeah.
Just go on Twitter and do that, I guess.
All right.
Please not at our Batman Shows account, but.
God, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Florida's reacting like somebody's heavy breathing.
I don't want to see a remake of this episode, by the way.
You don't?
Where they're all looking at.
Yeah, no.
Oh, you're trending, Dad.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Exactly. People on Facebook's blowing up with people calling you a fool for return that money.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
But and you do in the phone calls, you get that little a little bit where there are like a couple bad phone calls, and then James gets really mad and like, who the hell is this? And it's the Reverend.
Yeah. And then he sheepishly hands the phone to Flora. Or says who it is.
Reverend Gleason.
Total sitcom bit, but I laughed.
I did too, yeah.
John Amos does that kind of stuff really well.
But John Amos does everything well.
He really does, yeah.
He's, that really, I mean, I already liked him, but that episode and the other episode, what is it, Florida's Big Gig?
Mm-hmm.
Like, just between the two episodes, both of that, he and Esther Roll just show so much range in doing all the things required. Comedy, and of course he's good at being angry, but he's also good at being like sheepish. We used that a few times, and kind of like even embarrassed about being angry about. Like in that one, he's understandably angry about something, but he also understands that he shouldn't be angry about it. It's like one of those kind of things where you feel what you feel, but intellectually he gets that he shouldn't be angry about it. And there's a scene where just the two of them in their bedroom where they're talking through this thing, and it's just a really good dramatic scene, really.
Yeah.
And I really like their relationship, all of that.
Yeah, it's kind of befitting two people that came from stage and legitimate acting backgrounds, and
exactly.
And treated this as a show to make some messages and say things.
Yeah,
and cared about their performances, and it definitely comes across.
And it's good, right? I mean, it makes them seem like a real married couple. Yeah, like that they can have these arguments about things, but at the end of the day, they love each other, but there's complicated aspects to it, I guess. Yeah, one of the big themes of the series is James being frustrated by circumstances and kind of going up to the edge of doing something morally wrong or morally shady, if not outright wrong, and Florida trying to talk him out of it, and then something happening, and maybe James kind of saying,
the right thing and ultimately doing the right thing. But there's that tension a lot of times.
Yeah.
It happens a lot. And as a matter of fact, I was struck by similarities between this episode and another episode early in the first season where there's a job that he can take that the family kind of knows it's dishonest, and he wants to take the money, and he's kind of making comments about, what Florida sees as blasphemous comments about the Lord, and wanting to look out for himself because nobody's helping him. And it's kind of like that same back and forth, and it plays out in kind of a similar way here, but that was something that happened a lot, and I always enjoyed the dynamic between those two. But James wants to do the right thing, but he just, he doesn't want to be a sucker either.
Right. Yeah. And they're both like kind of responding to the same pressures, but in a different way.
Yeah.
Like he's like, this is the way the world is, so we should just play it. Everyone else is doing this. Let's do it. And she's like, that's why, if the world might be that way, but that's why we need to not be those people.
Yeah. And the reaction they're getting, these phone calls and like other reaction they're getting is from people criticizing them for not taking the money.
Yeah.
Or for returning the money in the first place.
Right. Yeah.
Which is interesting.
James does say something about that. Somebody says something about the supermarket being not a good supermarket either. So
yeah.
It may be like, look, in the community, they want to stick it to that maybe it's the only supermarket, and there's something about charging too much or not having good food.
Could be. Yeah.
And then, of course, you get the I guess maybe the response, the more expected response, which is some people come around looking for money. Those, JJ's friends.
Right.
And he goes out to talk to these guys, and they basically they think they got a good reward.
Yeah.
And they kind of try to mug him.
They're
for lack
trying
of a
to
better
strong
word.
arm him for
Yeah.
a cut of that reward that they think he got.
Right, and of course JJ's not built for fighting.
No, he's not.
But luckily James is. That was cool.
Yeah,
he just burst out of the door and like shoved one of them on the ground.
Yeah, he's not having any of that.
And of course, John Amos, he was a college football player, right?
Yeah. He's a physical presence.
Yeah. And then that was kind of funny. Like he's standing there just kind of like glaring at them, and JJ's behind him.
Yeah.
Fainting punches.
Yeah. Exactly. And and somebody else that's trying to get his cut, which is the Reverend.
Perhaps.
I mean, the Reverend, yes. They do a little bit of business, and the Reverend comes over, and it's funny because this happens again throughout the show on Good Times. Is Florida is devoutly Christian, but the whole family has a deeply cynical attitude about the actual religious figures in their community. They go to church, but you also get the idea that they're a little cynical about the collection plate, and they distrust religious figures that are asking for money. And usually, it turns out with good reason. The show is has no qualms about showing religious figures that are not quite all they crack up to be. And that first season episode that I referenced earlier actually had Roscoe Lee Brown as, I think, a televangelist or a miracle healer type who's looking to hire James to go with him, as kind of his touring act. And he is clearly just like a show business person, not an actual religious figure. So this is kind of another theme that the show got into a lot.
Did Marjo
Gordner
make an appearance to just walk on, like at the end of the episode? Like before the credits, he walked on the set and like, what you've seen is a depiction of how it really works out there.
Unfortunately, no. Somewhere in one of the many parallel Norman Lear universes, one that I would like to visit, Marjo did do that, but not in this one.
Okay. I found that interesting. I mean, even when he calls, like even before he shows up, that they've already presented. Someone says something about like, oh, he's looking for his cut or whatever, which of course we know does happen, and I imagine in environments like that where you don't have a lot of money, and on the one hand the church is something to cling on to.
Yeah.
But it can be easy for them to take advantage of you, even if they're just asking for your 10% or whatever.
Yeah. the Reverend isn't exactly explicit about that, but he does kind of sort of make a moral argument like, well, yeah, it's wrong. It would be wrong to take that money, but think of all the good that could be done with that money for the community.
Yes.
And he's kind of framing it as an overall helping the poor, helping the community, kind of that which could be done with the money.
Yeah.
So James, I think, initially doesn't see it as so much the moral thing, but he kind of latches onto that. But he's also thinking, well, I don't really want to help the whole community. I want to help the family.
Yeah, that's all. That's all that matters right now, and I understand that. I mean, they're not in a situation where they can help the whole community.
Yeah, I mean, James is a blue collar worker. He's often working multiple jobs.
Yeah.
Florida works sometimes, not all the time, I think.
Yeah.
They're like I said, they're living paycheck to paycheck. So $2,000 is a massive amount of money.
Yeah.
For a family that's always struggling to make the rent, and for a family that actually, I think James mentioned this, right? He talks about getting Michael into a good law school.
Yeah.
Talks about Thelma taking classes, or was it acting class or dance class?
Yeah.
And getting good art classes for JJ. So he's got
specific,
specific things, supplies that he can get for everybody in the family. It's not just that he wants to go, today would be about, I don't know. I want to say go buy a big screen TV, but it seems like everybody has a big screen TV nowadays.
Yeah. Certainly a better TV than they have.
Yeah. Yeah. The one they were watching the 6 o'clock news on was...
JJ had a set that set is so old it still shows Jackie Gleason on Saturday nights. Which is honest. Based on the title and where this is going, or where I thought this was going, and my limited knowledge of the Honeymooners, I thought this was going to be more like that situation where a surefire, we're going to get a lot of money, people acting kind of goofy because of that, and then
like going out and buying a bunch of new furniture on credit,
right? Yeah,
and then finding out that your reward is a $50 gift card, and then you get
yeah.
Yep.
But no.
Yeah, not quite what happened.
Can we go back to the not only the phone calls, but someone knocked on the door and threw what I think may have been a Lester dummy.
Oh yes.
Into the apartment, with a note on it that said, "For the dummy that gave back all that money."
Yeah, what a burn that was, huh?
Yeah, and then and that between that and the guys beating up JJ, that also led to a callback to the phone thing where James opens the door and just grabs the Reverend by the collar and pulls him in.
Because he expects it's somebody trying to cause trouble.
Right.
Or openly trying to cause trouble, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the point of that is. I mean, you waste a pretty good ventriloquist dummy by tossing it in there in such a cavalier fashion.
I know.
Like, I don't know where do you just, in the Cabrini Green projects of Chicago, where you just get a ventriloquist dummy like that that you can just throw around?
And somebody had one. Their kid wanted to be the next Willie Tyler.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe every kid had a Lester.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
I hate to think that some kid there was... his dreams of being the next Willie Tyler were quashed because, a parent thought, no, this is more important. We're going to go make a point to that no good Evans family.
Yeah.
Goes throws it in there.
We're going to throw this thing we spent money on.
Yeah. Maybe it had a note like on the other side though of the note to the Evans, like, oh, please return when done to.
Yeah. What if
apartment 3C?
What if when he threw it back out, it had like looked up at him?
Yeah.
You are a dummy.
That would have been interesting.
Yeah. And then James just kind of arched an eyebrow, and that was it.
Yeah. And then they just didn't
went back
address
to
it the rest of it.
Yeah. And I guess it's just lying out there I guess it's not a hall. Their door opens to the outside. Is that how you take it?
It's kind of like I guess it's kind of like, there's an apartment
hall
on the other side. Yeah, it's almost like a foyer. Seems really inappropriate. I'm sure there's a name for it, but
yeah, I don't know if it's if they're on the first floor and it's a building and then there's a sidewalk and then another building.
I don't think it's covered.
Okay,
but but it's kind of like it's almost like an alley.
But they're not on the first floor because in the backdrops you can see they're way up so it's probably like an open air a breezeway.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I think in other times though it seems more like enclosed. I always thought, but Well, we're just gonna have to take our field trip to Cabrini Green
I believe
projects
I
and
think
take a look at some of the
demolish
stuff.
Cabrini
Oh man,
Green.
we'll never know now.
No.
That was a historical landmark. That was where Good Times was set.
Yeah.
How could they get rid of those beautiful projects?
I don't know what they were thinking.
Uh,
So, back to the Reverend and all that, and it's, yeah, the whole argument isn't, I don't know. Like, in a way, I definitely side with James. Like, I understand why he's doing what he's doing. But, of course, Florida is such a moral force that I understand her point of view, too.
she's adamant about her position.
Yeah, and she has an interesting way of making her final argument. She should suggest ways that other members of the family could make money.
Yes, she uses kind of the reverse psychology
Yeah.
by telling Thelma to hang out in seedy places and dress provocatively.
Yeah, and Michael to use his number of skills to help out the
Yeah,
bookies.
yeah,
And I don't know if she bothered getting to change it.
yeah.
I think there was something for him, but
It's funny because these are essentially activities and things that they talked about other episodes
Yeah.
of the show. So it's not like she just pulled that out of the blue. It would have been very,
right.
very real, and it works. I mean, she makes her point.
Yeah,
James like, okay.
right.
There's got to be a happy medium in there
Yeah.
somewhere, but Florida's going to the extremes to make her point.
Yes. Now, there was an earlier point where I think this is even before the Reverend showed up, or even the guys to beat up JJ, that she says it's a crime, and James says, "Yeah, well now I just have to ask for a pardon." And I looked up the dates, and so Ford became president in August of '74.
Okay.
He pardoned Nixon on August 9th.
Mm-hmm.
And this was taped on October 10th.
Ah, very interesting.
And aired, as you said, in December. So it was a pretty good topical burn there.
Yeah, well put.
Yeah.
It's a good observation, definitely. It's kind of a show that wasn't explicitly political, usually about naming names, but clearly there was a political undercurrent, and it wasn't. I don't think it was Republican, Democrat. It was us against them, really.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, James agrees to do the right thing, and then the scene before the credits is kind of a little odd too, where they're getting like mail about this.
Yeah, apparently this is the biggest event in Chicago
Right.
that happened since
Yeah.
since Henry Warnemont got hit in the head by a home run in the World Series decades ago. This is a big thing.
Yeah, and they're dividing them into fan letters and not fan letters, which there are more of those. And then the Reverend, he gets in the middle because his letter, of course, is on neither side, and both sides at the same time,
Yes,
perhaps.
he's a slick fellow.
He, he is, yeah. I think the line that kind of sums up the show, or sums up Florida's argument, and I guess the argument of the show really is that she says, I paraphrase a little bit, but maybe we can't change the world, but we can't let it change us.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think
Yeah.
she's pretty consistent with that philosophy,
Yeah.
and that's definitely one of the themes is her struggle to prevent not just James, really, but the temptations that the kids have too.
Yeah.
Because JJ's, faces all the kids face gang life and shortcuts, hustles, all kind of things going on, and she's
Yeah.
trying to keep them out of all that.
Yeah.
It's a good episode, I think.
It is a good episode. Yeah.
It kind of gets into some, quote unquote issues, but it's very funny. It's well acted, and I never think that they're consciously trying to beat us over the head with some kind of moral issue, but they're showing characters with different points of views, having them argue about it, and then kind of coming to a conclusion at the end. But
Yeah, which seems like the model for this kind of show, which is you create a situation then is not so much about plot situation or actions, but about it creates the environment to have this discussion.
yeah, I think All in the Family is maybe the one that comes to mind. It's
Yeah.
kind of an obvious similarity to this to Good Times, really.
Right.
And do you want to talk about some of the larger themes again of the show, or the kind of the we've sort of alluded to the Ebony magazine article.
Right, that was fascinating. So, Wikipedia can be rightly criticized sometimes for having misinformation, but when they have references and you go to the reference, it can be useful. And I was surprised. I wasn't sure what the link was going to go to, and it was a Google Books scan of this Ebony, a pretty long article from 1975.
Mm-hmm.
It's the last season that John Amos was on, and although he wasn't interviewed, I guess, or he chose not to be interviewed. But it was about a lot of the tension on the set, and Esther Roll in particular was expressing frustration about JJ, but I think about other things too, and the other characters weren't getting to do enough, and were getting overshadowed, and it was losing the thread of what she thought the show was about.
Yeah,
and it seemed like some of the. I guess they only talked to the actresses, the three actresses, right?
Yes. Didn't they also have a quote from? They had a quote from Jimmy Walker.
Oh, and Jimmy Walker, yeah, who of course saw it differently. But
yeah, I'm not sure that if Ralph Carter was quoted in that.
But they all expressed in different ways frustration, I think.
Yeah.
And the point they made the point that Thelma, her character is the only teenage black female on the air.
Mm-hmm.
So she felt a big responsibility. It's understandable. It's really fascinating to see it at that time, not 20 or 30 years later, people looking back and saying this is what it was like. It's like, this is how it is right now.
Yeah.
And John Amos had some sort of contract dispute already.
Yeah, and that magazine article caused a stir, apparently, when it came out. Mm-hmm. Now, I've always been interested in this story because the shorthand version is, John Amos left in a salary dispute. Esther Roll left because she thought the show was becoming a cartoon, and JJ in particular annoyed her.
Right.
So I did some research into this and have been looking into this, and it's very interesting because Jimmy Walker gives a little bit more nuance to the story in his autobiography. And it seems like
those are words you wouldn't expect to go together.
Jimmy Walker and nuance.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting read, and I think one thing that stands out to me is I think you accept a lot of that story because, except for this book, I don't think Jimmy Walker's said a lot about this, and I think he's kind of taken the high road, and he sort of says that in his book that he tried not to really get into it. And in the article that we're talking about, that Ebony article, he says something like he wants to be a doer. He doesn't want to be a leader. He doesn't want to be a follower. He doesn't want to be a symbol of the whole black race.
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of the tensions in the show is, John Amos and Esther Roll were trying to see the show as a vehicle to promote positive values.
Yeah.
And Esther Roll famously insisted on not being a single mother. She wanted there to be a father figure in the household because she wanted a black family sitcom with a complete nuclear family unit. She wanted there to be a father figure there. Although Jimmy Walker, though, coming from another background from stand-up comedy, he was just concerned about the jokes.
Yeah.
So the way he says it is there was tension. I think the Willona and the other kids, they were trying to stay out of this. And anytime you see allusions to like the tension in the set, it was just the two adult and JJ. But in fairness, one thing that Jimmy Walker points out is that, and he admits this, is he would try to punch up the show by putting in his own jokes. Mm-hmm. He and his writers that he had as a stand-up comedian,
yeah.
He would bring stuff to the set and slip it in, and I think Norman Lear, somebody, people would actually say stuff to him, like, hey, you can't do this, and he was kind of concerned with getting the laugh. And you could see how seasoned performers that were kind of committed to learning the lines and doing it, they would take umbrage to Jimmy Walker coming in and trying to get laughs that way. He also points out that one of the early directors of the show, Esther Roll, had lobbied for somebody that she knew who had like a stage background, and they got rid of him. And the way Norman Lear did it was pretty cold, according to the way Jimmy Walker tells it. He just kind of like called him back during one of the production meetings, and the guy left and with his suitcase and never showed up again. But they brought in John Rich, who had been on the Dick Van Dyke Show, was a seasoned comic director, and he emphasized more the comedy of it. Was very no holds barred as far as being very blunt and everything. And he was the one that seized on the dynamite and wanted it to be in every episode,
Right.
apparently. Walker didn't necessarily want that, and that, but Walker's account kind of hints at the fact that Esther Roll was a little miffed already that her choice for director was kind of forced out of the show. So there was other things going on, too. And he doesn't really come out and say this, but I think other people seem to indicate that there might have been a little jealousy, too, because a show that was supposed to be about John Amos and Esther Roll got all this fan mail for Jimmy Walker.
Right. And John Amos and Norman Lear have both said correct that that John Amos was kind of caused some disruptions on the set.
Yeah, and
disagreements.
And it pains me to say this, but Jimmy Walker says he looked up to John Amos, but he said he thinks he was kind of trying to intimidate him on the set, and he points out that John Amos was only 8 years older than he was at the time. I think he was like 30. They were 35 and 27, or something like that when the show started, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
But I guess what he would do would be he'd do things like he'd say, instead of talking about it to Jimmy Walker, he would say things like, "Do we really need a joke right there?" or something like that, and just kind of act like he's not talking to him and kind of doing that sort of business. And it kind of led to Jimmy Walker just kind of keeping to himself and not really being part of the whole cast. But there were definite issues there, and one other thing is that Walker says he thinks that Norman Lear was really hurt by that Ebony article because it was also pointing out the lack of black writers on the show, which Walker himself points out that there were several that were working for the show at various times. So he said it wasn't that there weren't any, but he thinks that kind of like killed the show in Norman Lear's mind. Like he never gave it the same attention or just never felt the same way about it. It kind of like took the spirit he had about the show. It took him out of it. Just took it out of him, which is interesting. So it's kind of a complex thing, and Walker, he does defend the character. He says that they did ease off Dynamite eventually, and they kind of scaled it back, like even kind of the end of season 3 when John Amos was still there. But and he actually agreed that he didn't think that the catchphrase should be used all the time. But he also thinks that he was just wanted the show to be funny, and a phrase he uses is like, "You need a show needs to have a character to quote take the pie." Like take the pie in the face and sort of be the buffoon. He doesn't really say it like that, but you kind of need that comic character. And he was a little bit baffled by accusations of minstrelry and things like that, because he says he based the character on Art Carney's performance of Ed Norton, which is fascinating to me as a big fan of the show. But he said that's what he built his whole performance around. So he saw it as more like okay, just kind of a comic relief character to come in and do the jokes, not so much like, okay, I'm putting out a bad portrayal for the whole race. And he also says that they actually won and did a couple of NAACP Image Awards early on, including he did for his portrayal as JJ.
It's complicated.
It is. There's a lot more to it, and I hate the idea of John Amos and Jimmy Walker just not getting along in it, but it seems like that's the case. They're just not. Right. They just, came from different worlds, and it showed.
Yeah. I think it did seem to me, I mean, this is a good episode, and that other one is good too, but sometimes the tonal balance is a little off between the comedy and the drama. Like, to me, the dramatic parts were more effective, especially that scene I was talking about in the other Florida's Big Gig, where they're having this, just the two parents having the conversation in the bedroom was just like a great scene. Yeah,
maybe we should mention real quickly that James thinks he's going to get a good job.
Yeah,
he sort of Florida comes along to the interview with him.
Right.
He's kind of drags her there and says, well, maybe there'd be something for you too. And it's actually Charlotte Ray's character that is all prepared to hand him the job, but then she's told by her superior that they want to give it to Florida because she's a woman.
Right.
And it checks off another box in the diversity.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. Like 74, and they're already talking about this.
And like the comedy in those scenes worked really well. Mm-hmm. Maybe because it's all these experienced hands. I forget the actor who played Charlotte Ray's boss, but he's, another recognizable guy. And of course she's Charlotte Ray and is quite smitten with James.
Yeah, well, he's coming in trying to be charming and just making jokes and being very, self-confident.
Yeah.
So I just want to, that's also in season 2, Florida's Big Gig.
And so it's like the emotions of that are complicated because one of them needs the job.
Yeah.
and yet it hurts his pride,
And he knows that that's why they tell him
Yeah.
that that's why she's getting
exactly.
the job. So
They're
he knows
like,
exactly
either
what it
she
is.
can have it or no one can have it.
Right.
He talks about just like always as soon as he's up, he's down again, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's just the multiple layers of emotions going on there are really interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of gender-based spin
Yeah.
on at a time when affirmative action was kind of an issue, and in this case, James loses a job because of his gender.
Mm-hmm.
It is to his wife, though.
Yes.
So it stays in the family, but he's not happy with it.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed these. Can we talk about the theme song?
Oh, please!
Famous theme song.
We should sing the theme song, maybe.
I didn't realize.
Where's
I guess
my pitch pipe?
There's controversy about the lyric, like what the lyrics are.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I was.
There's like a Dave Chappelle sketch where
I don't remember that.
it was like testing. I forget if it's like testing someone's blackness, and if you're properly black, then you hear one line.
Oh.
It's one line in particular, and then if you're not like other people hear it the other way, but I forget what the line is.
It's not Easy Credit ripoffs. That's the one that I didn't understand for a while.
No, it's something about like one version of it is jiving.
Oh, after scratching and surviving.
Yeah. So there are two variations of the lyricist at some point confirmed that it's not the one that
It's hanging
Chappelle.
in a chow line, right?
Yeah, that's what the sketch said it was, and it's not. It's the other.
It's actually.
It's hanging and jiving or something.
Which is funny because I think I'll have to check this again, but I think if you watch the subtitles on certain channels, I think it actually has it's hanging and jiving.
So I think that's correct.
Well, but yeah, actually no, I think it. Yeah, boy, now I can't remember which one. I always thought it was hanging and jiving.
Yeah. Well.
But I didn't get the chow line from the Dave Chappelle show. I think I got it from subtitles somewhere.
Okay.
And I thought, whoa, have I been wrong all this time?
Yeah.
Because the show's on DVD, and it's also on the Roku channels the time we record this. But as far as I know, not streaming anywhere else.
So, lyrics of the theme song are notorious for being hard to discern, notably the line hanging in a chow line or hanging in and jiving, depending on the source used. Dave Chappelle used this part of the lyrics as a quiz in his I Know Black People skit on Chappelle's show. So it might have been actually white contestants. In which the former was claimed as the answer. The insert on the Season 1 DVD box set has the lyric as hanging in a chow line. However, the Bergmans, we're going to come back to them, confirmed that the lyric is actually hanging in and jiving. Slightly different lyrics were used for the closing credits, with the song beginning on a verse instead of the chorus.
Yes.
So, but I don't know if you looked at this, but I looked up the lyricists are Alan and Marilyn Bergman.
Yes.
And the music was written by Dave Grusin, who, among other things, wrote the theme song for St. Elsewhere. But I think you might have looked this up just based on something we recently discussed, because the three of them are responsible for another song.
They're responsible for many songs.
Many songs, but
which I think we discussed before.
The Alan and Marilyn Bergman team, with different musical people, are responsible for lots of songs. But then these three together, do you know what song I'm talking about?
I'm not sure with the three together. I know what the Bergmans did, but
It Might Be You.
Oh no, yeah,
Stephen Bishop's song.
Yeah, that's funny.
And
From
yeah,
Tootsie.
yes, and they with Marvin Hamlish did The Way We Were.
Yeah.
That was the one I recognized the most.
Okay.
But
yes, they also did, I think, the song from the Thomas Crown Affair.
right, yeah.
So quite a dichotomy. I was focusing more. I thought you were going to talk about their TV theme song work.
I didn't see enough about that.
Well, they co-wrote the song from Maude.
Oh right, yeah.
And they co-wrote the song from Alice.
That's right. Yeah, I did.
So
see those.
yeah, the Bergmans very
and
prolific.
I think that was all those were with Dave Grusin.
Okay, and they were able to capture the essence of the inner city.
Yeah.
With the Good Times theme song.
It's three very different songs. I don't know the Maude one very well, but what would you consider the style of that song?
The Maude one?
Yeah.
Well, it had Donny Hathaway, so kind of an upbeat Just an upbeat R&B song, almost like a
Okay, so it's kind of R&B too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so.
Of course, the Good Times is a little more
Almost
gospel
like
influence.
yeah, I think Maud maybe a little bit more gospel, but it's just kind of a solo performance essentially. Where yeah, the Good Times has more of like a chorus kind of aspect to it.
Yeah, and then of course Alice is
Yeah,
wistful and Linda Lavin, or excuse me, Alice. I'm sure Alice is
Yes.
singing her own song. Right?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the Good Times theme song though, and I love the fact that there's almost a second version of it at the end.
Yeah.
And to me, the first one just kind of starts off with good times, and it's more like joyous, whereas the end to me is that one is very wistful to me. It's just kind of more melancholy, just looking out of the window, and it's kind of more of like a more thoughtful version of it actually, and just one of the great theme songs in TV history, I think.
Yeah. I also like one of my memories of the show. I think it must have been like the reruns must have been on like right before the news or something. Because I remember the end credits and the paintings, but I think it's later paint like this painting didn't look as familiar, but like I don't know, like more like people dancing or something.
Yeah.
But that always stuck with me.
Another thing I want to mention too is the role of white people on the show. Mm-hmm. And I kind of mentioned earlier that I think race was often dealt more for comedy, and I think one reason I say that is because white people on the show were usually treated as the butt of the joke, and it was more like instead of them being villains, it was more just being ignorant, like a white person coming over and sort of trying to use, jive lingo, or just
Right.
being totally amazed at the ghetto, it just being like another world to them. But the Evans just sort of looking at them like sort of amused by it,
Yeah.
but not really resenting them by it. And growing up as a kid, I thought it was funny. I never,
Right, yeah.
I'd never dream of being offended by that or anything. But it was clear like, okay, the white people are like the bumbling idiots on this show,
Yeah.
and the black people are the ones that really know the situation, and they're really the smart ones ultimately.
Yeah. What do you think of James's frequent use of jive as an adjective?
I like it. I'm all in favor of it.
Okay.
That's the 1970s. One of the worst things you could be would be to be a jive turkey.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't think I've ever been a jive turkey. I hope
I
never
hope
to be
not.
one. I don't consider myself one.
Okay.
How about you?
In Florida's Big Gig, which I watched first, I think he only said it once. Mm-hmm. But in Windfall, he said it, I don't know, 10 times.
Yeah.
It was a lot.
Well,
And now I'm wondering if maybe that was just a TV safe fill-in for some other word.
yeah, it was a versatile word. It was a
Yeah.
noun, it was a verb, it was an adjective.
Right.
And, Willono used it a lot. And, yeah. I mean,
It struck me as possibly also one of those, white people trying
right.
to make it sound like black people. I hope the actors had enough. It sounded like they weren't afraid of expressing their opinions. So
Yeah.
if I feel like maybe one of them would have said, "We don't say jive that much."
That's a good point. I mean, there may have been some people of color working for the show, but let's face it, if you look at the credits,
Yeah.
like executive producer Sid Dorfman, things like that.
What are you saying?
I'm saying that I don't think Sid Dorfman was an African American. I never met the man, but
Right.
I'm confident in that
Some
assertion.
evidence. Yeah.
So yeah, it was a largely white, and well, we know one of the main producers who's actually quoted, I think, in that Ebony article.
Yeah.
Alan Manning, is it?
That
Alan
sounds
Manning.
right. Yeah.
I mean, he was white.
Yeah.
The director I talked about, John Rich, was white.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, there was a lot of white people behind the scenes and behind the cameras, but essentially an African American cast. So yeah, you're right. Hopefully, it seems like they were vocal enough, and I think Jimmy Walker, he wasn't the only one. I think some of the other cast members would try to contribute things here and there, and try to make it more realistic. And
Right, because, I think John Amos and Jeanette Dubois were both, writers too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think John Amos might have written some episodes. Is that right?
I think he's I don't
co-wrote. Yeah.
I think he's listed. I don't know how much he actually did, if it was a
Right.
story idea or what, but
Yeah.
I think he was credited with that. So yeah, it's a show. I think it holds up. I think it's funny. It's well acted, and it's got a lot of charismatic performers in it.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't really talk much about Ralph Carter. I guarantee you he's going to make an appearance in our playlist for this his musical career, but Ralph Carter was actually considered a big star. He was on Broadway in the credits for like years. It was Ralph Carter appears courtesy of the production of Raisin in the Sun, something like that, which is an unusual.
It says the music.
Oh, it's Raisins, not Raisin in the.
Yeah.
Okay, but I think it's a musical version of.
Right.
So yeah, originally there was talk that he wouldn't be able to be on the show. And do you know who originally was assumed would be Michael Evans on the show? And actually was crushed when it turned out that the contract situation with Ralph Carter was resolved, and so this actor had to go find another job. It'll make sense when you hear it, but it's not one you would think of.
1973.
And he was about
3.
Yes. His breakthrough role would come not in television. No, good guess though.
Not in television. Michael Jackson.
Not Michael Jackson.
Okay, no, go ahead.
Lawrence Fishburne.
Oh yeah.
So the time frame is about right if you think about it. And
right.
Can you imagine? But yeah, originally he was. They thought he was going to do it because they wouldn't be able to get Ralph Carter.
Yeah.
So Ralph Carter's good, and his character is a little bit, he's a little bit too old to be the precocious cute kid. But some of the stuff he says, it's like, oh, you might think, oh, it's a little cute. He's talking about this radical, talking about Black Panthers and bringing up these social issues. But he's old enough and good enough that it's credible coming from him. And I actually think his character is an important part of the show too. I always enjoyed him.
Okay.
Really, I liked everything about the show except maybe the last couple of seasons.
Yeah.
But it was funny, but it also talked a lot about a lot of serious issues. Pretty much anything that you could mention as a social issue of the time, they covered it. Whether it be alcoholism, child abuse, sometimes in the same episodes probably.
Well,
death of characters.
Sure.
They would ultimately, have some famous scenes with how they got rid of John Amos's character. So Good Times has it all, I think.
What happens when your hot tub overflows?
What happens when your hot tub overflows? Yeah, that's a serious issue.
Right.
Thank God that only a Norman Lear show would have the guts to take that on in the 1970s,
What happens when your waterbed bursts?
Yeah.
Really just water.
Anything water related.
Yeah. What happens when you just have too much water?
Yeah.
Too much clean, pure water.
That can be a catastrophe in and of itself.
Yeah.
Let me tell you.
Right.
Having too much clean water.
Yeah. Just watch Waterworld.
Yeah. I'm sure in inner city Chicago that was a frequent thing. Fire hydrants being busted open and
right.
water going all
I'm
over
sure
the place.
in the underwater version, Aqua Good Times.
Yeah.
The issues are totally different.
It is, and I love the episodes where they took on White Manta on Aqua Good Times.
Yes.
That was always a treat.
Right. The pointy helmet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. One day, all of these Earths, Norman Lear Earths, will be back together.
Yeah.
Or something. Yeah. Aqua Mod was particularly good too.
Yeah, that was always a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because when they said mod, it would have that bubbly sound.
Yeah. And of course, there were theories that the whole Aquamod premise was just basically built around getting Adrienne Barbeau in a swimsuit, but I'd like to think that they had legitimate artistic reasons to make an aquatic version of Mod.
Right. Yeah. All right. With that, I guess we should wrap up Good Times here.
This version of Good
This
Times.
version. Wonder what Aqua Battle of the Network shows is like.
Oh, we'll have to get into that. The dunk tank would be just epic in that one.
Well, yeah. I was talking about us. The Aqua version
Oh,
of us.
yes, the Aqua version of us.
Yeah.
We're a long way off from that,
But
I think.
yeah, the dunk tank would be reverse dunk tank.
Yeah, we'll have to get special microphones and
Yeah. I'm sure in the aqua world it all makes sense.
Yeah.
They've invented
And
that.
breathe underwater. And
Yeah. It's normal.
well, if you want to see Aqua Battle of the Network shows, let us know.
Yeah, well, we'll work that out eventually.
But this has been
In the meantime,
regular good times.
good times. Yeah.
And ain't we lucky we watched them?
Yeah.
Several episodes of Good Times. This episode brought to you by Borgen Supermarket Chain. We reward loyalty. This episode also brought to you by Family. This episode also brought to you by Dino Mud. Ha! You thought we were going to say something else, didn't you? Join us next time for another exciting episode of Battle of the Network shows. Learn more, leave feedback, and suggest future episodes at battleofthenetworkshows.com. Follow us on Twitter at BatNetShows and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Battle of the Network Shows.